You've probably wondered this at least once. If you were going to learn a second language, or maybe even a third language, what would the easiest one be? I used to be obsessed with finding the perfect language to learn. I'd spend hours researching things like the closest languages to English, reading government statistics. I was convinced there just had to be some secret shortcut. Some language that would just instantly click because it shared grammar or vocabulary or some sort of cultural background with English, my native language. But after deep diving into how language acquisition actually works, I realized I was asking the wrong question. The real question isn't about asking which language is easiest in theory. It's about which language becomes easiest for you in practice. Now, when we talk about language difficulty, we're usually referring to data from places like the US Foreign Service Institute. These sorts of places engage in activities like estimating how many hours of classroom study it takes to become proficient in a language. According to their research, European languages like Spanish, French, or Italian require about 720 formal hours of study, while more exotic languages like Arabic, Korean, or Chinese require closer to 1,950 hours. Now, I'm no mathematician, but that's nearly 3 times longer. Now, on the surface, this makes perfect sense. Languages that share vocabulary, grammar structures, and writing systems that are closer to English seem like they should be easier to learn, right? But here's where it gets interesting. These numbers only tell us about formal classroom learning, and nothing about how language acquisition actually happens in the brain. Now, if you want to learn more about how this acquisition process happens or how to actually do it for yourself, you can take a look at the link in the description. Let's talk a little bit about what makes a language actually feel easier or harder to learn. Take Spanish, often touted as one of the easiest languages for English native speakers to pick up. Yes, it has familiar vocabulary. Words like hospital, animal, natural, these words are all practically identical to English. The grammar follows logical patterns, and the pronunciation is relatively straightforward. Okay, maybe there can be some hiccups. But what those difficulty rankings don't account for is your personal connection to the language and the quality of the input that you have accessible to you. Consider someone who's absolutely captivated by Japanese anime, manga, TV series, and just the culture in general. They have access to thousands of hours of compelling content. Shows they actually want to watch with stories that actually interest them. Compare that to someone who's dutifully working their way through some Spanish textbook, doing exercises about ordering coffee, despite having zero interest in the Spanish-speaking culture or the language itself. Who do you think will progress faster? This reveals something crucial about how the brain actually acquires a language. As I always say, we don't acquire a language by memorizing grammar rules or vocabulary lists. We acquire a language by understanding messages that are of interest to us. When you're genuinely engaged with content, your brain naturally focuses on comprehension, which is exactly the state where your brain acquires a language most effectively and efficiently. As always, here is a framework we can use, and I call it the Comprehensible Engagement Principle. The easiest language for you to learn is the language where you can find an abundance of content that is meaningful to you that you actually want to engage with. Even if you understand this content only partially through body languages or some surrounding vocabulary that might be a little bit more simple, this is a much more effective and efficient route to getting conversationally fluent than grinding through a textbook or a vocabulary list. Instead of asking which language shares the most features with English, ask yourself which language gives me access to content I'm genuinely excited about, and where can I find content that is so engaging I forget that I'm studying? This insight actually has profound implications on how we look at studying and learning in general. We've been conditioned to believe that difficulty is a feature inherent in the content or the subject itself. That calculus is hard, that Chinese is hard, that coding is hard. But what if difficulty is actually more about your relationship to the subject? What if the things we call hard are just things that we have yet to find a compelling way to engage with? Let's think about it. You probably know someone who can't remember the basic historical facts they learned in high school, but can recite every excruciating detail of their favorite TV series even if it spans multiple seasons. Same brain, different engagement. The Spanish language isn't inherently easier than Chinese, but if you have access to compelling Spanish content that makes you excited and want to engage more, it becomes easier for you to acquire. Again, for a further deep dive in how we can take these concepts and apply them to your progress in language learning, take a look at the link in the description. Here's something that will completely change the way you look at language learning difficulty. Dr. Stephen Krashen, one of the leading researchers in language acquisition, he noted that he's actually better at languages where he had easy comprehensible input. Not the languages that were theoretically easier, but the ones where he found more engaging content that he could actually understand. He acquired German rapidly through an immersion experience, not because German is particularly close to English, but because he had compelling input. Interesting conversations, engaging books, and a talkative landlady that he said made the language come alive. Meanwhile, there are people who study Spanish for years using traditional methods and still can't hold basic conversations despite Spanish being ranked one of the easiest languages for English native speakers to acquire. If it's not clear by now, the difference isn't in the language. It's the method and your engagement level with it. So next time someone asks you which language is easiest to learn, you might just want to turn the question around. What kind of content do you love consuming? What cultures fascinate you? What stories do you want to understand in their original language? The easiest language for you is probably the one that gives you the most access to interesting ideas, thoughts, experiences, and stories. The ones that generally, for whatever reason, excite you. The key is finding the sweet spot where curiosity meets comprehension, and where learning stops feeling like a chore and starts just feeling like discovery. And speaking of finding what works for you, YouTube's multi-billion-dollar algorithm has found you something that it thinks would be really beneficial to you if you watched, because you just watched this video and this one really complements the one you just watched, so click it. See you in the next video.